Good morning. David Fowkes. I'm with FCI Capital Advisors. I've been in aviation banking for about 25 years, the last 10 in helicopters. So I started running M&A for Bristow a little over 10 years ago. And after I left them, I got hired by CHC as a banker to restructure their fleet in their Chapter 11. And then I got hired as a banker to represent the Equity Committee in PHI's bankruptcy. And then I got hired by the Unsecured Creditors Committee to represent them in Bristow's bankruptcy. So you're noticing a pattern here. We've all been through these up and down cycles. We happen to be in a really good upswing cycle right now, so we've got a good story for you. It's a great panel today. We've got a leasing company here that is in Brazil and other places and leases to the operators. We've got an operator here with CHC, and then we've got Steffen Bay down there at the end. He was the CEO of a helicopter company in Europe for a while. He was the CEO of he ran a Brazilian helicopter company for a while. And now he helps people come in to do, among other things, be able to operate and set up businesses, including helicopters in Brazil. So today what we're going to do is we're going to walk through some of the tailwinds that are pushing forward offshore flying, mostly oil and gas, in Brazil. We'll explore some of the headwinds that could actually slow things down. And then we're going to discuss some storm clouds that are out there, especially with some things that have happened recently in the market out there in terms of what could disrupt offshore activity in the Brazilian market. And so what I'd like to do is start by having each of our panelists just give a little update or a little introduction as to who they are and what they do.
Okay, so good morning, bom dia. Gustavo Semeraro, VP Business Development at Lobo Leasing. Lobo is aviation lessor, global aviation lessor. Our core is helicopter leasing, so we have a fleet of helicopters distributed worldwide in different type of operations, since H125s flying firefighting in Europe, to AW139s flying EMS in Australia, to 189s flying search and rescue in the Falklands, and 76s flying offshore here in Brazil. So the company is based in Ireland. Now we're celebrating 10 years in the market this year. Brazil was always a very important market for us. If I'm not wrong, I think Lobo was the first helicopter leasing company to establish an office in Brazil. It was back in 2015 when I joined the company. And yeah, and this is a great market for us, still very important, and with a promising future. Yeah.
Hello, Vinicius Moreira from CJI Helicopters. I'm working at the offshore aviation market since 2015. It's been a while. And probably you guys are not much familiar to the offshore aviation. So CJI is one of the global leaders in this vertical aviation market for offshore. So we take people to the oil platforms, and right now CJI has around 150 aircraft in its fleet. Here in Brazil, we are growing, and I can say that's a really good moment to be in the offshore aviation market as well, especially in Brazil.
Bom dia, good morning. My name is Steffen Bay. As David mentioned, I started my career with Airbus. I had different roles there in Germany, in France, and Indonesia, and the United States. I then changed on the other side, worked for an operator, for ERA, what eventually became Bristow, the two large companies together with CHC. While working at Bristow, they made an acquisition in a company called Aerolio Aerotaxi in Rio de Janeiro. So I was sent down first as a liaison and then worked as a general manager. After that, I spent a couple years in the leasing business, and then I went back into operations. I ran a company in Europe, in Belgium, that had business in all over Europe and West Africa, called NHV, with about 600 employees, about 58 helicopters. And then I left the offshore helicopter world and spent about 2 years in a startup, in an electrical startup called Vertical. And I started my own company about 6 months ago, and I do consulting out of Rio de Janeiro, like David said, for all kinds of aviation-related topics as well as Brazilian topics. And, happy to have this discussion with you today.
And I'm happy to have these guys. They're tremendous experience that they can share with you guys today. So let's talk about the good stuff first. So there's incredible tailwinds behind the market right now, which is wonderful with the downturn we had with all those bankruptcies. And that's behind us at this point. So Vinny, how's the recent and expected growth impacted the demand in the market that you're looking at?
Yeah, that's interesting because we have gone through some downturns on the offshore aviation, especially in Brazil. But now we are going through a challenging moment regarding supply chain, globally speaking. And it made the available aircraft super valuable. So right now, I would say that the offshore aviation market in Brazil has around 120 aircraft. Most of it's for Petrobras, of course. But in the upcoming 4 to 5 years, we expect that at least 50 to 60 aircraft will be tendered or retendered. So there's a lot of new greenfield projects as well. So we expect to have a very strong growing demand in Brazil, and for at least more 5 years.
Gustavo, as someone who looks at the global fleet and the regional fleets, how do you think what's happening in Brazil now impacts your view on the fleet going forward?
Well, definitely, the market's in a great cycle, very positive cycle now. Specifically, the offshore market is cyclic, as we all know. The market that suffered a very long downturn since 2015 to 2019. Anyway, this positive cycle now is more like a recovery of what happened in the past 5 years. So I would say, in our case, investors, lessors, most of us are recovering, are putting back to fly a lot of assets that were idle, during many years. Definitely, Brazil is a place that's demanding. That's a global cycle, of course, on the offshore market. But Brazil is one of these main markets. So yeah, I think we are ready for it. Looking forward to the new opportunities that are coming. As part of this downturn that happened, it forced many of the investors and leasing companies to diversify more their portfolio and go more to other markets like EMS, search and rescue, firefighting. This is exactly our case as well. But with activity coming back and prices now becoming more realistic, back to some realistic numbers, it justify investment to be back to this market. So definitely Brazil is our target.
Thank you. So Vinny, contract terms that people are getting now, are they allowing, and how are they allowing operators to have more stable operations than in the past?
Yeah, finally the customers understood the real necessity of this market, not only for us, the aircraft operators, but also the lessors. So right now, if I have one large tender, I will not find available aircraft in the market right now. So probably I'll need to go to the lessor and request a new leasing. The terms will be at least 5 to 7 years, and so that I can negotiate a good rate. So right now, the main customers in Brazil are offering secured 5-year contracts. And as a public entity, there's a limitation. They cannot go over it, but we were discussing that prior to here. We understand that Petrobras is changing the understand, and we expect that the upcoming tenders will have at least, certainly more than 5 years. We expect something around 7 up to 10 years.
Steffen, you've got tremendous experience in multiple markets over many years. So how do you view the current Brazilian market today in historical terms versus Brazil in the past, and also other places you've seen in the world?
That's a good question. We have an upcycle. It's like my third cycle in the industry. Like Gustavo said, the last one has been pretty deep and longer. Usually you recover more quickly. Right now, Brazil is in a growth phase. Brazil is also a country that is still increasing its oil production, while in the North Sea it's basically stagnant or declining. Some countries have decided that they will even stop producing oil, like Norway and Denmark. Yeah, so there you will have decommission work, but you will not have increased production. There are some companies that are going into existing oil fields because with the technology improving, you can now still extract, you can go into an oil field that an oil major has abandoned and a smaller oil company is going in and still extracting oil. So this is also happening. So Brazil is Brazil used to, like you said, I think it's less aircraft right now. I think it used to be about 120, then they went down to, I think, between 50 and 60. Now we're at around 70, and the expectation is that it goes back to 100. So the market is right now in an equilibrium, I would say. Yeah, we had an oversupply after the latest downturn in COVID. So a lot of aircraft were in storage or were with banks, were parked, were parted out, and they have now all come back to production. So the prices have increased for the lessors and for the manufacturers. And I think they will continue to increase because what the OEMs, Airbus and Sikorsky and Leonardo have learned, I think, is that it doesn't make sense to produce a lot of whitetails. Like whitetails are aircraft that are basically ready to be, they made them on speculation. So this is, I think, not happening at the moment. They only will make an aircraft when they have a firm order. And this secures price discipline, so I think the prices will stay solid for now, because what has happened is that the oil companies, with their tremendous power, have pushed the operators down. They have demanded price decreases, and that have led to bankruptcies, as you know. You worked in a couple of those, so a very unhealthy, unsafe situation. And I think this situation has now improved for the operators. They demand longer contracts. There's also something in the North Sea which is called cancellation for convenience. So you can cancel a very expensive contract with no reason at all, which is totally unfair, but the oil companies have not been willing to give this up. So in Brazil, this is much, much better because you get a 5-year commitment, which, by the way, I think, in my opinion, I would not want a 10-year commitment. I think 5 years is perfect because the market is changing. So you don't want to lock yourself in for 10 years because you might miss out on an increase. If you had locked yourself in for 10 years 5 years ago, you would now be stuck with a very bad contract and would not be able to increase the prices like you need right now.
Right. So
Did
Vinny,
that answer your question? Or?
Oh, perfectly, thank you. Vinny, we've heard talk about oversupply of aircraft, and now it's getting into balance. We also know that offshore oil in particular, and also Brazil, likes newer for safety reasons, for efficiency reasons, for all kinds of reasons. How are the customers, the operators, the leasing companies dealing with this? What's being done to make it reasonable or feasible for you to start to introduce some new aircraft into Brazil, whereas there have been none really introduced in most of the world for the last number of years?
Actually, we're discussing that Brazil, we play that Brazil is like the luxury market for offshore aviation now. So we have a really large set of standards. We call it IOGP 690, and Petrobras is driving that change and requesting that all aircraft meets that requirement. So it's not only taking an aircraft from a lessor or acquiring a new one, but also you have a large set of modifications that you need to buy, and that's why it's so important not having determination for convenience, etc. That's why it's so good. But right now, and please, Gustavo can complement, but if you need a new aircraft, if you want to bring a new leasing, as I said, we are just finding availability within the lessors for mid-2025 or 2026. So it's been tough. And regarding the 10-year contracts, it's exactly this. Of course, the moment is good, right? The prices are fair, I would say higher, but I would say fair. But if you want to acquire an aircraft, if you want to actually take a new build, it seems reasonable to have a 10-year contract in that case. But of course, for the existing aircraft, I think 5 to 7 is something good enough.
Okay, Gustavo, how do you think is there enough there for you and your investors to put money into buying new helicopters?
Yeah, I think Steffen made some very good points in the video as well. I think the whole industry learned a lot of lessons in the last years, right? With this downturn. And investing community, the leasing companies, they suffered a lot, right? And also OEMs, but mainly because of lack of discipline from our side and from OEM side, right? And those lessons learned are generating good results now, and I hope the industry can keep that, in mind and not start to cycle back to what happened back in 2014, 2013. In other words, lessors are with much better discipline at the moment, avoiding, the huge orders and spec positions. That was, very bad for the market at that moment. That ended up resulting in lessors competing with OEMs to place aircraft when we had a downturn starting. So our strategy, we always avoided to do spec positions because exactly of that reason. And so, so we could navigate in downturn quite, relaxed and stable because we didn't have, specs coming to us, positions coming to us. But so at the moment now, lessors are basically holding on their orders, which is good. As Steffen said, OEMs are much more disciplined and not producing in the spec as well. So they're producing on demand. And to be honest, this is what the market needs. So that kind of discipline. So basically, oil companies, they need to plan better for their renewals and their new needs. Something like the search and rescue market and the EMS market, they do very well worldwide. So oil companies needs to follow that. And with much higher mobilization timing, so that would allow the market to have this balance that we have now. And that's going to encourage more investments from our side, in the whole industry to be in the equilibrium, in balance that Steffen mentioned.
So we've kind of tiptoed a little bit into the first headwind, which is supply. So with the 50 to 60 tenders and retenders, it implies some sort of growth. And we hear that aircraft are just generally not available, used and new, going forward there. So Steffen, do you see this improving in the near future? And if so, how does
improving?
The supply of aircraft available to come into Brazil to feed the growth that is projected right now?
Yep. One thing, of course, the manufacturer can always increase production. It takes some time, but it can be done. The other thing is, Petrobras used to not accept, for example, aircraft that are older than 10 years at the end of the contract. So they have now eliminated that requirement. They will, if I'm informed correctly, accept aircraft that are up to 30 years old. So that can also change the supply imbalance, if you just fly the aircraft longer. Because I have never understood this 10-year requirement, because there is absolutely no statistical evidence that between accidents and age of the aircraft. Most accidents are pilot error, or there is maybe a maintenance failure. But the age of the aircraft, if it's well maintained, has normally no effect at all on how dangerous it is to fly. You might want to have the latest technology, but so you can retire an aircraft. But for example, I would not have a problem entering a 30-year-old aircraft if I know it's well maintained. Yeah, so that there is a new thinking also within the oil companies, because out of necessity. Yeah. So but I don't see, for example, we know the oil is coming to an end. So the 525, which is a new aircraft from Bell, will probably be the last new aircraft that will be designed for oil and gas. I don't see any other manufacturer spending the huge amount of money that is necessary to certify a new type right now, because we know we're going to get out of the oil age and getting into renewables. Yeah, So in my opinion, the current types are the ones that will fly till the end.
Thank you. So Vinny, if we can't bring you more helicopters into Brazil, you can always get more productivity out of your existing fleet, right? So can you squeeze much more productivity out of the fleet that you are currently flying here in Brazil?
Yeah, that's tough because due to these constraints regarding supply chain, especially in the main manufacturers, I mean Leonardo, Sikorsky, those guys are going through severe issues to secure the global supply. So of parts, right? So what we have done, usually in the past, when the market had more aircraft, we used to provide backups, right? We used to provide like a free aircraft. Anytime my aircraft isn't available, I would put another one to replace it for a while. But what we're doing, now we're selling those aircraft because it's necessary. So I would say that it's not feasible to squeeze it, right? We are really on the limit of our capacity.
Yeah, one of the things that we saw from the last major downturn, when all the aircraft were on the ground, they were returned for convenience. When oil went from 100 to 25, operators with cancellation for convenience would have 5 helicopters, and they would typically fly them Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. and noon, because that was convenient. And imagine using a, $30 million helicopter just kind of 40% of the time you could use it. So the first thing they did is they flew it as much as you could. You flew it 7 days a week, and that led to a lot of the downturn. So a lot of that slack is out of the market now. So these guys are not sitting on the ability to fly aircraft more. We typically before the downturn, you'd see 50 hours a month on some of these helicopters. Now you're over 100. So even if you had the parts, which they don't because they can't get the supply, you couldn't fly these things more anyway. You just physically can't fly them. It's like when Southwest showed up and started to fly 737s like crazy, and everyone else copied them. So that's been done. We can't fall back.
Yeah, another thing that we've seen also is the oil companies got much smarter in the downturn on load factors and scheduling. So I've seen a lot of waste in my time where aircraft with 12 seats were half empty, or they were flying a tool to a platform because it was urgent, because money was still free flowing. So they have gotten much smarter how they schedule people, how they load them, that make it more efficient. So I think there's also not much more fat in the system. I think it's maxed out.
Okay, we've got about 15 minutes left, and what I'd like to do is pivot to what people aren't thinking about right now. So let's talk about the storm clouds. So back during the downturn, there was a helicopter which was a workhorse called the EC225, and it had a couple of crashes because of some design reasons, and it went out. So it no longer flies in oil and gas. Some people are trying to get it fly there. There was lots of slack in the system at the time for the market to backfill, especially since it was in slow time. But if, and some people would say when, another important helicopter gets grounded for a period of time, a day, a month, a year, and just to point out a fact, in the last 2 weeks, there have been a crash in 2 of the most important helicopters that fly in Brazil. Don't know what the causes are. They'll investigate it. No reason to think they're going to be grounded. But at some point, helicopters get grounded for some reason. So when it does, it will make it really hard for the Brazilian oil and gas market at that point. So I want to talk to the experts here about, okay, what is it and what can be done about it, if anything? So Stefan, you lived through it as an operator. You were in the middle of it. Can you talk about how the market placed the 225 back in 2016 after the crashes?
How it replaced it?
Yeah, how did the market deal with it back then?
The 225 is a heavy helicopter with 18 passengers. The only other model that could compensate was the S92. So basically, Sikorsky got a present from Airbus. So basically, all S92s were were flying. Yeah? And then there are some missions that you normally would require a heavy helicopter, but you can fly it with a smaller helicopter if you reduce the payload. So you just put less people in it, or less, you max out the fuel and you reduce the weight. And so you can fly these missions as well, not as efficient, but you can still do them. So there was a lot of arranging going on, yeah. Like in Brazil, there is sometimes a heavy helicopter is used because the airports are remote and they are small, but you can fly the same mission with a super medium helicopter. So there was a bit of a shift towards other models then to compensate for it.
And there was enough slack in the system. So Gustavo, as an expert in the global fleet right now, how would the industry deal with any of the major helicopter types in Brazil going down now? How would you be able to? How would the industry be able to backfill one of them going down?
Well, most of the players now in the offshore industry here, they are global operators, right? So they may have some possibility to relocate aircrafts, But anyway, when that happens, it affects the market globally, not only one jurisdiction, right? Because it's a problem of a type. Anyway, some companies may have, helicopters in other type of missions that can be suitable for offshore. For example, search and rescue. So they may try to do some relocation internally if that's the case. Not simple at all, but that's possibly one of the solutions. The other one is, having some, let's say, waivers from, in this case, Petrobras or the OGP, companies under OGP rules to be more flexible, and even allow other types to be covering, as happened in the past, right, in other situations. Yeah, and anyway, and that's going to be a risk in this industry, I would say forever, because I fully agree. I don't see many other types coming to balance, the types that we have, to diversify more the types we have in the offshore market today. We have the H-160 now coming into play that, some years until it's established and gaining momentum, and then we have the 525. Besides those, yeah, we also don't see any other type, coming. So the market need to get by with what we have, basically. Yeah.
So Vinny, from just a CHC perspective, what are your internal options? Does CHC have a bunch of acceptable to Petrobras and others aircraft sitting on the ground somewhere that you could send here? What about the older type, 76s, old Bell 400s? What could CHC do to fill some of this?
Yeah, the problem is I don't see Petrobras, I don't see those customers returning due to safety questions, right? Safety. I cannot say that the 76 is not safe. It's a great machine. But due to the standards and due to some equipment that are required and are mandatory right now, I don't see large oil and gas companies doing this backward path. But as a global company, we do have some availability in our global fleet, right? Although all the markets are pretty strong right now, we also provide like search and rescue, EMS, medical evacuation. So sometimes we can see some contracts being finalized around, and as Brazil are in a moment with really good prices, we can convince our global management team to bring aircraft here. So that's what we are doing, but not evaluating older aircraft. Especially the Bells as well. We don't see that coming.
Yeah, so it doesn't sound like it's easy. It doesn't sound like there's nearly as much slack as there was. Safety for the offshore helicopter industry is incredibly important. They operate, much safer than most do, and the unions drive that as well. A big reason why the 225s didn't fly again is the unions refused to get on it, and the customers as well refused to get on it. So unless global oil companies start to waive some of the safety equipment that they put on these things, or waive going to older aircraft, or change how they're doing, it's not going to be very easy to bounce back. So, and again, if any of these models that we're talking about get grounded, you have to remember they don't just get grounded in Brazil, they get grounded globally. So everyone will be dealing with it the same way, and they'll be taking the helicopters that they have in their market and trying to deploy them differently. There's no more capacity in the existing market, in the existing helicopters, because they're flying the heck out of them, and there's no slack capacity around. So it's going to be a lot more difficult, you know, when something like that happens. So to take away some of the storm clouds, and Stefan, again, you've run multiple operations in multiple parts of the world. If you were either operating or you were an oil company, what are some of the things that you think the Brazilians can do, again, whether it's the oil companies or whether it's the operators, to make themselves more resilient for something to go wrong, if something were to go wrong?
Yeah, you need to have a diversified fleet across, you know, different categories, like the Brazilian companies are doing and offering. You know, you don't put all eggs in one basket. You diversify your fleet with different manufacturers, different classes, and maybe have a little bit of extra reserve for emergencies. I know they don't want to do it because it costs money, but that will be a way to be sure that you can keep operating. Also, the 2 to 5 case is really a very rare instance. If there is an issue with a helicopter, usually you reduce the maintenance interval, or you check the part every day, you know, and then there's a redesign. But it's not really likely that a helicopter is taken completely out of service. By the way, I think the 2 to 5 is about to make a comeback. They have now completely redesigned the gearbox that caused the issue, so it will take some convincing, but I think Airbus is on the way to bring that aircraft back into the oil and gas market.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just a matter of time. Like, down a day, kind of easy to deal with. Down a week, a little bit of a pain in the neck. Down a month or a quarter, all of a sudden you're having difficulty potentially getting people out to the rigs, and some of these rigs, if it's down for every day, it's $1 million.
I mean, you could also transport people by boat, you know, if
right.
Push comes to shove. The workers don't like it, it takes longer, it's more dangerous. They want to go home quickly after they work 2 weeks on the oil rig. So there's other possibilities, other technologies to get people to a rig than a helicopter.
Absolutely. One just final question before we go to questions to you guys. Just a, you know, 30 seconds or a minute on, you know, where do you see the Brazilian offshore market going kind of in the next couple of years? What are we going to see, do you think?
Yeah, I think as we discussed it here already, it's, you know, going up. We'll keep on that, you know, positive trajectory for at least the next 5 years. I think that's clear. Again, it depends on a cycle. I mean, the offshore market depends on a cycle, that depends on oil price and many other things, geopolitical things and other things that happen, but looks like the cycle is here for at least additional 5 years, yeah. So.
Yeah, and one of the things to remember is many of these deep water platforms cost $1 billion to get running. So even if oil price drops, it takes a while. I mean, they may fly less, but if oil drops to 25 tomorrow, they don't shut down the wells that are going.
Yeah, of course, it's growing. It will keep growing, but I think the main word here is balance, right? We should be concerned about, the market is demanding aircraft, so let's start buying, let's start dropping aircraft in Brazil. Because if we do that, we can grow for like 2 or 3 years, but after 4 or 5 years, we will return to the same downturn that we have always seen. Yeah. So I think that's important. We need to be concerned. The lessors need to be concerned. Of course, always, whenever possible, we'll try to have some spare availability. This is important for the operation. But I think balance is the word.
And with that, I mean, we just saw there's a Saudi helicopter company that last week ordered 250 helicopters, which kind of what happened in the fixed wing world when Etihad and Emirates ordered all those planes. So not good for the future. They don't start delivering for a few years, but again, that's a bad omen for the future.
I agree. I see solid growth, not exponential, no hockey stick, but you know, steady growth for the next 5 years. But there's a down cycle coming. Yeah, we don't. It's not if, but when. So, but I think the next 5 years, and like you said, the break even of these projects are calculated over sometimes 20 to 30 years. So you keep producing even if oil goes below the break even. You cannot shut it off. You can, but it costs a lot of money. So and you need cash flow. So as long as you are cash flow positive over the term of the project, you know, you keep producing and keep flying.
Thank you. So we'll go to questions, and I'm going to rephrase the first question a little bit. It doesn't include everyone. Have offshore operators, lessors, and clients learned their lessons from the last downturn? So what is the industry doing differently than they did in the past?
Yeah, I may take that one. I think so. You know, we see today, as I said, at least most of the lessors now have a completely different strategy. No longer in that strategy of, you know, speculative positions and orders, which, you know, it's a lesson learned. And we also see, you know, the same with the OEMs, right? OEMs are now not doing a spec, you know, production as well, right? Yes, with the market growing, you know, and with this kind of, I don't like to say tight supply, I say balanced supply, but start to make some investors more, willing to invest back in spec positions. So maybe some of the lessors will start doing that again, but I don't think all of them will do. You know, so in our view, I think definitely many lessons were learned. I wouldn't say all of them, of course, but most of them were.
Yeah, you know, people who have lived through cycles, they are more careful. But people tend to forget, you know, it's human nature to get greedy again. I had a discussion with Airbus and Leonardo when they were overproducing, and I said, you should do it like Ferrari. So they or Lamborghini, they basically do a market study and say, okay, we could sell 1,000 aircraft, so let's make 700. You know, so residual values always stay high. And I think what they have learned, though, is overproducing or making short-term gains and selling a lot of aircraft is in the end bad for everybody, because the values then go lower, the lessors cannot finance it, the banks will go in default, operators will go bankrupt. So to keep this discipline, you know, but we don't know, you know, people might forget, and the times are good, and leaderships might change, and they might change their decisions. But I think the current people that are in charge, they still remember the last downturn, so I think they will probably stay the course for now.
Yeah, people are still feeling the pain. Yeah. From the last.
I mean, there's no excitement. I mean, it's more positive, the mood in the industry, but people are not enthusiastic, you know, like they were when Gustavo knows, you know, people were announcing hundreds of orders at the CJI. So those times are definitely not coming back, I think.
Well, except for THC just ordered 250 helicopters.
Okay, but that comes...
But they say they're going to keep them all in the Middle East, as opposed to going offshore with them.
And in an operator perspective, I would say that our main lesson is now we are in a position to educate the customer, right? So we are reinforcing and making sure the customer is aware about the fair terms. And the customer, they need the aircraft, right? We're still not using boats in Brazil, right? So they are understanding, and they are positively replying to it. So we can see the changes, as we spoke about it. We can see the changes on the contracts, on the recent terms, no termination for convenience, longer term contracts, some technical waivers as well when necessary. So I think that's it as well. We need to, what we are doing differently is we are being more robust on our discussions with the customers.
I also think that what the leasing firms and the operators are doing is being a lot more disciplined on what they're willing to bid. So it shocked in 2016 the operators when someone used the cancellation for convenience or threatened to use it, because no one had ever done it. And then I think that it has surprised the oil companies. They put out some tenders in various places in the world, and nobody's bid on it. right? So as long as the leasing companies and the operators together have discipline in not bidding themselves down, and when companies have gone bankrupt and are being run by private equity firms that have taken them over, they will likely maintain that discipline because they just, you know, they don't care. They're not going to lose money on something. So lessons, I think, have been learned is the answer. But to Steffen's point, how long will they be remembered? It will always be a cycle. It will happen 3 years, 5 years, 7 years from now. It will go through it again, and the question is, how bad will it get? So, we're good? Hey, thank you guys, and thanks to the panel.